Humiliated by her origins, a little girl kept silent until she decided to confront the system. What began with a school notebook became the trial that would make history. Because sometimes dignity is inherited, but courage is learned. It all began in a public elementary school on the outskirts of Oakfield. It was a morning like any other, and little Sarah Harrison, a 9-year-old Navajo girl, known for her intelligence and kind behavior, entered the classroom carrying a new notebook, a gift from her grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor. However, one malicious comment was enough to transform that morning into a painful moment in her life. Sarah came from a humble family. Her mother, Grace, worked long hours as a textile artisan to support her 3 children after her husband had to migrate north in search of work. The little girl had inherited her mother's artistic talent and always wore braids adorned with colorful ribbons that her grandmother made for her every morning before school. "Look, everyone. The little Indian brought a new notebook. She probably found it in the trash," exclaimed Tyler Mitchell from the back of the classroom, son of one of the most well-off families in the region. The mockery didn't stop there. "Why do you keep coming? With those ridiculous braids? You look like a servant from the market. My mom says you people will never progress no matter how hard you try." The classroom fell silent. Some laughed quietly, others looked down uncomfortably. Teacher Ms. Roberts wasn't present at that moment. She had stepped out briefly to get teaching materials. Sarah remained standing, holding back tears, not reacting. Her new notebook, decorated with silver stars that her grandmother had carefully glued on, now seemed like an object that embarrassed her. What nobody knew at that moment was that the response would come, but not impulsively. It would come with the weight of dignity, with the strength of generations, and would change the course of a judicial hearing months later. When Ms. Roberts returned, she immediately noticed that something had happened. Sarah, usually participative, had become invisible at her desk. Her eyes shone with contained tears, and her new notebook had disappeared into her backpack. Ms. Roberts wasn't like the other teachers at Lincoln Elementary. Originally from Virginia, but with 15 years teaching in Oakfield, she had developed a special sensitivity toward children from indigenous communities. She herself had faced discrimination in her youth and recognized the signs of silent suffering. "Sarah, could you stay for a moment after class?" she asked quietly as the others went out for recess. That day, between contained sobs, Sarah told her not only about what had happened that morning, but all the previous times. How Tyler and his friends made fun of her way of speaking when her Navajo accent filtered through some words. How the girls avoided sitting with her during lunch. How some parents told their children not to play with the Indian kids because they had other customs. "My grandmother says I should be proud of who I am," whispered Sarah, "but sometimes I wish I could be invisible, Ms. Roberts." Ms. Roberts made a decision at that moment. She had already noticed the pattern of aggression suffered not only by Sarah but by several children of indigenous origin. She had reported it multiple times to Principal Wilson, who always minimized what happened, treating it as kid stuff or suggesting that indigenous students should adapt better. "This isn't normal, Sarah, and you don't have to accept it," Ms. Roberts told her, taking her small hands in hers. "I'm going to talk to your mom." That afternoon, after classes ended, Ms. Roberts visited the modest Harrison home in the Pine Ridge neighborhood, an area where many Navajo families who had migrated from the interior of the state lived. Grace Harrison, Sarah's mother, listened, with growing indignation to what had been happening. "The principal never listens to us, Mrs. Harrison," explained the teacher. "But this is discrimination, and there are laws that protect Sarah. If you agree, we could go to the Office for the Protection of Children and Adolescents." Grace hesitated. Like many people from her community, she distrusted the judicial system that had historically ignored them. Besides, confronting the Mitchell family, owners of several businesses in the city, seemed like a lost battle. It was then that Grandmother Eleanor intervened. At 75, she had lived long enough to see how her Navajo people were systematically marginalized, how their language was ridiculed, and how their rich culture was reduced to a tourist curiosity. "It's time someone said, 'Enough,'" declared the old woman with a firm voice while weaving on her belt loom. My granddaughter is going to grow up knowing that her blood and her heritage are worth just as much as anyone else's. The episode generated a wave of internal repercussions. The school administration, upon learning of Ms. Roberts' visit to see the Harrison family, tried to dissuade her from moving forward. Principal Wilson called Grace to resolve the misunderstanding internally. "They're children, ma'am. These things happen in all schools," he told her with a condescending tone. "Besides, your daughter needs to learn to integrate better. Perhaps if you removed those traditional braids and dressed her more like the other children." Those words were the catalyst that Grace needed. The next day, accompanied by Ms. Roberts and grandmother Eleanor, she filed a formal complaint with the Office for Protection. No one expected that this case would become the first judicial process for moral damages caused by school bullying based on ethnic discrimination in the history of Oakfield. Meanwhile, in the hallways of Lincoln Elementary, rumors began to circulate. The Mitchell family was notified, and their reaction was immediate and aggressive. Amanda Mitchell, Tyler's mother and a prominent local businesswoman, mobilized her connections. She would not allow her name to be tarnished by what she considered an exaggeration by those people who always play the victim. News of the judicial process spread like wildfire through Oakfield. In the artisan market where Grace sold her textiles, opinions were divided. While some indigenous families saw in the Harrisons' action an opportunity to make an endemic problem visible, others feared reprisals. "You're going to lose customers, Grace," warned Carla, a folk art vendor from the neighboring stall. "The Mitchells know everyone, and they own the new shopping mall. Who's going to defend a Navajo family?" But to the surprise of many, the case began to gain notoriety beyond the neighborhood. A local journalist, Sarah Jenkins, published an article in the Oakfield Observer titled "The Girl Who Challenges the System: Discrimination in Oakfield Classrooms." The article avoided mentioning names since minors were involved, but detailed the systematic pattern of discrimination that Indigenous children faced in urban schools. Amanda Mitchell didn't waste time. She hired attorney Richard Fuller, an influential lawyer known for his aggressive tactics and political connections. His strategy was clear: discredit the Harrison family, minimize the facts, and, if necessary, attack Ms. Roberts' reputation. "This is an orchestrated campaign against my son," declared Amanda at a parent association meeting. "Now it turns out that children can't make comments without being taken to court. What's next? Suing because someone wasn't invited to a party?" Attorney Fuller submitted a brief arguing that it was all misinterpreted children's games and requested the dismissal of the case, alleging lack of elements that constituted real discrimination. He also insinuated that the complaint could be a strategy to obtain economic benefits. "The Harrison family wants to take advantage of the situation," he argued in the hallways of the Office for Protection. "Isn't it suspicious that they're suing one of the most prosperous families in Oakfield?" While adults waged legal and media battles, Sarah faced her own silent war at school. Although Principal Wilson had ordered Tyler and Sarah to be separated into different classrooms as a preventive measure, rumors spread. Some children began to avoid her, fearful of becoming involved in legal problems. Others, emboldened by comments heard at home, intensified the microaggressions. "My mom says your family is troublemaking and just wants money," a girl told her during recess. But unexpected allies also emerged. Sophia Williams, daughter of university professors, began sitting with Sarah during lunch. Daniel Garcia, whose mother was an activist for indigenous rights, defended Sarah when others tried to bother her. Ms. Roberts faced her own workplace harassment. Principal Wilson excluded her from important meetings, assigned her more duties during recess, and publicly questioned her teaching methods. Some colleagues, fearing reprisals, began to avoid her in the teacher's lounge. "You should have handled this internally, Lisa," said Vice Principal Karen Fields. "Now the school is divided, and we're being investigated by the Department of Education." "And continue ignoring what's happening," replied Lisa firmly. "How many more children have to suffer in silence because it's more comfortable to look the other way?" Despite the pressures, the date for the hearing was set. It would be presided over by Judge Gabriela Ortiz, known for her progressive approach in cases involving minors and vulnerable groups. The news troubled Attorney Fuller, who had hoped the case would be assigned to one of his friends in the judiciary. 1 week before the hearing, something unexpected happened. Grandmother Eleanor, guardian of Navajo traditions, had an idea. She gathered several artisans from the market, and together they began to weave. Day and night, their expert hands worked on a beautiful ceremonial dress for Sarah. "You will go to court wearing the dignity of our ancestors," she told her granddaughter while showing her the garment adorned with ancestral symbols. "Let everyone see that you are not ashamed of your heritage." On the eve of the hearing, tension was palpable in both families. At the Mitchell home, Amanda was instructing Tyler on what to say. "Remember, son, you were just playing. You never meant to hurt anyone. That girl is very sensitive and misinterpreted your words." Tyler, however, seemed uncomfortable. At 10 years old, he was beginning to understand the implications of his actions. His father, Frank Mitchell, observed the scene with concern. Unlike his wife, he had grown up in a more modest family before making his fortune in real estate, and something about the situation troubled him. "Amanda, what if our son really did say inappropriate things?" he asked when they were alone. "Maybe we should consider an apology." "Apologize?" she responded indignantly. "That would be admitting guilt. The Mitchells don't bow to anyone, least of all to a family trying to dictate how we raise our son." In the Harrison home, the atmosphere was different. Grace, Ms. Roberts, and grandmother Eleanor prepared Sarah without imposing a script. "Just tell the truth, my star," her grandmother advised while braiding her hair with colorful ribbons. "Your word has power." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She feared the moment of facing not only Tyler and his family, but a system that had historically silenced voices like hers. In the darkness of her room, she took out her notebook with silver stars, the one that had triggered everything, and wrote down what she felt. They weren't words of hatred or revenge, but surprisingly mature reflections on identity, respect, and dignity. Meanwhile, in different parts of the city, other actors prepared for the hearing. Journalist Sarah Jenkins researched backgrounds of similar cases for a special report. Attorney Fuller reviewed strategies to discredit testimonies. Judge Ortiz reviewed jurisprudence on children's rights and ethnic discrimination. And on social media, the hashtag #BuyIamSarah began to gain strength, driven by indigenous rights organizations. The morning of the hearing dawned with unexpected news. A group of mothers from Lincoln Elementary had organized a peaceful demonstration in front of the courthouse. Many of them were Navajo, Hopi, and Apache women whose children had also suffered discrimination. They carried signs with messages like, "Diversity is not discriminated against," and "For schools free of racism." The Mitchell family arrived in a luxury SUV, escorted by Attorney Fuller and 2 assistants carrying briefcases full of documents. Amanda walked with her head held high, deliberately ignoring the protesters. Tyler, however, looked nervously around, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Minutes later, the Harrisons arrived. Sarah, wearing the beautiful traditional dress, and with her braided hair adorned with flowers, walked between her mother and grandmother. Ms. Roberts accompanied them a step behind. They didn't have expensive lawyers or assistants, but something in their silent dignity caught the attention of all those present. When the doors of the hearing room opened, no one could imagine that what was about to occur would not only change the lives of 2 families, but would set a precedent in the way Oakfield society would address ethnic discrimination in schools. The hearing room at the family court was more imposing than Sarah had imagined. The pink sandstone walls typical of Oakfield contrasted with the modern dark wood furniture. On the bench, Judge Gabriela Ortiz observed all those present attentively while organizing her documents. Unlike other judges, she had decided to dispense with distant solemnity and opted to create a less intimidating environment, especially considering that minors would be testifying. "Good morning, everyone," greeted the judge. "I want to remind you that this is not a criminal trial, but a hearing to determine if moral damage existed due to discrimination and school bullying. My priority is the well-being of the minors involved, not pointing out culprits." Attorney Fuller was the first to speak. With his impeccable suit and voice trained for courtrooms, he presented his initial argument. "Your Honor, we are here because of an unfortunate misunderstanding between children. My client, young Tyler Mitchell, at no time intended to discriminate or harass. These are normal interactions between classmates that have been taken out of context." He then displayed graphs and studies on child behavior, trying to normalize what had occurred. He also presented letters from other parents describing Tyler as an exemplary child and positive leader. He even provided testimony from Principal Wilson, who assured that he had never observed discriminatory behaviors in the institution. When it was the Harrison family's turn, they didn't have the polished oratory of a professional lawyer. Grace, with a trembling voice at first but which gained firmness, narrated the episodes of discrimination that her daughter had faced. "It's not just what happened that day with the new notebook," she explained. "It's years of comments, exclusion, looks that make my daughter feel less worthy because she's Navajo." Ms. Roberts presented a detailed record of incidents she had documented during the last school year. Derogatory comments about indigenous language, clothing and traditions, systematic exclusion of some children from group activities, normalization of pejorative terms like Little Indian or Redskin. "Judge," said Lisa, looking directly at Gabriela Ortiz, "these are not isolated cases or misunderstandings. It's a pattern that reflects deep-rooted prejudices that no one at the school has wanted to address." Amanda Mitchell interrupted, visibly upset. "This is absurd. My son is not racist. In our home, we teach him to treat everyone well. If the girl is hypersensitive, it's not Tyler's fault." Judge Ortiz intervened firmly. "Mrs. Mitchell, you'll have your turn to speak. Please respect the procedure." The horn. Atmosphere became even more tense when Attorney Fuller suggested that the whole case was a strategy by Ms. Roberts to gain notoriety and advance her career, even insinuating that she might be manipulating Sarah to obtain exaggerated statements. It was then that the judge announced she would hear from the two minors involved. To reduce pressure, she decided that parents and lawyers would wait outside, leaving in the room only herself, a child psychologist from the court, and the children, one at a time. Tyler entered first. Although he tried to project confidence, his restless hands revealed his nervousness. He repeated almost mechanically the phrases he had rehearsed with his mother and Attorney Fuller. "I was just playing. I never wanted to hurt Sarah. She's my classmate, and I respect her." However, when the judge asked him specifically about the comments regarding the new notebook and traditional braids, Tyler lowered his gaze. "My mom always says that," he began, and then stopped, as if reconsidering his words. "At home, they say that people like Sarah are different, that they don't try hard enough to progress." The child's unexpected sincerity surprised the judge, who noted something in her notebook, before thanking Tyler for his honesty. When it was Sarah's turn, everyone expected to see an intimidated girl. Instead, she entered with a firm step, her colorful dress contrasting with the sobriety of the room. She sat in front of Judge Ortiz and looked her directly in the eyes, something unusual for a girl her age. "Sarah, could you tell me what has been happening at school?" asked the judge kindly. What followed left both the judge and the psychologist speechless. Sarah didn't limit herself to repeating the specific incidents. With extraordinary eloquence for her 9 years, she spoke about how, since kindergarten, she had learned to hide her Navajo identity. She described how she avoided talking about the stories her grandmother told her, how she had stopped bringing traditional food in her lunchbox after some children said it smelled weird, how sometimes she pretended not to understand when her grandmother spoke to her in Navajo in public. "I don't like looking in the mirror sometimes," she confessed in a clear voice, "because there I see what they say is wrong. My skin, my nose, my hair. But my grandmother says that our ancestors are drawn on our faces and that forgetting them would be like erasing 1,000 years of history." Judge Ortiz, visibly moved, asked her what she had felt when Tyler made fun of her new notebook. "It wasn't about the notebook," Sarah responded. "It was because that day I decided to feel proud of my grandmother's gift, and when Tyler made fun of it, I understood that No matter what I do, some will always see what I am as wrong. Then the unexpected happened. Sarah took out from her small embroidered backpack the notebook with silver stars and opened it to a specific page. "Last night I wrote something I want to read," she said, and without waiting for a response, began. "Thank you, Tyler, because your hurtful words made me understand that I am not the problem. The problem is the broken mirror through which some view our heritage. Thank you, because now I know that I must speak, not just for myself, but for all the children who hide as I used to. Our braids, our languages, our faces, our stars that have been shining for centuries. And stars don't go out just because someone decides not to look at them." A deep silence fell over the room. Judge Ortiz, with more than 20 years of judicial career, had to make an effort to maintain professional composure. The child psychologist was taking notes frantically, amazed by the girl's emotional maturity. When the hearing resumed with everyone present, something had changed. Tyler no longer maintained the haughty gaze rehearsed with his mother. Instead, he looked at Sarah with a mixture of amazement and shame. Amanda Mitchell, perceiving the change in the atmosphere, cast a worried look at Attorney Fuller, who was nervously reviewing his documents. It was Frank Mitchell who broke protocol. Standing up, he asked for permission to speak. "Your Honor, I would like to say something if you'll allow me." To everyone's surprise, Frank addressed the Harrison family directly. "My son made a mistake. I made a mistake by allowing our house to speak with contempt about the traditions that are the soul of Oakfield, of America. I cannot erase the damage caused, but I can promise you that this will be a turning point in our family." Amanda tried to stop him, but Frank continued. "I want to publicly apologize, and I propose that instead of prolonging this process, we work together to implement an intercultural education program at the school." Frank Mitchell's proposal turned out to be just the beginning of a greater transformation. Judge Ortiz, Indiwei, her resolution determined that moral damage due to discrimination had indeed existed. However, beyond the economic compensation, which the Mitchells would pay to a fund for multicultural education, she ordered concrete measures. The school should implement a mandatory program of intercultural education and combating discrimination, supervised by experts appointed by the Oakfield Human Rights Office. Principal Wilson should receive specialized training on managing intercultural conflicts and preventing school bullying. A formal protocol would be established to report and address cases of discrimination in all schools in the district. But the real change occurred beyond what was officially dictated. Ms. Roberts was named coordinator of the new intercultural program. Principal Wilson, pressured by the Department of Education and civil organizations, submitted his resignation, being replaced by a director with training in intercultural pedagogy. Tyler, in a gesture that surprised everyone, asked to be part of the first group of cultural ambassadors, a program where children of different origins shared aspects of their traditions. Even Amanda Mitchell, although initially reluctant, ended up collaborating with Grace in organizing workshops where Indigenous artisans taught traditional techniques at the school. Sarah, for her part, was invited to participate in a youth congress on inclusive education, where she shared her experience with children from all over America. Her case became a reference for other schools and families facing similar situations. One afternoon, 6 months after the hearing, Sarah was in the schoolyard showing a group of classmates, including Tyler, how to weave bracelets with Navajo designs. "My grandmother says that each thread has a meaning," she explained confidently. "This represents water, this corn, and this the stars that guide us in the darkness." Tyler, concentrating on his weaving, looked up and asked, "Sarah, do you think someday you could teach me some words in Navajo?" The girl smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph or superiority, but of hope. The seed planted on that painful morning had blossomed into something that no one could have predicted, a bridge between worlds that for too long had remained separated by walls of prejudice and silence. And as the children's laughter echoed in the schoolyard, Grandmother Eleanor, who observed the scene from the door where she had gone to pick up her granddaughter, nodded with satisfaction. The words she had passed on to Sarah were now transforming realities, reminding everyone that true strength had never been in keeping quiet or assimilating, but in the dignity of raising one's voice and saying, "This isn't normal, and I won't accept it anymore." Dear listeners, we hope that Sarah and Tyler's story has touched your hearts and invites you to reflect on the transformative power of dignity and courage. To continue this journey of stories that illuminate the realities of our communities, we have prepared a special collection of equally moving tales. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Each week we bring new voices that, like stars, shine with their own light, even though others may decide not to look at them. Your comments help us continue weaving these bridges of understanding and respect. We'll see you in the next story.